Israel ve'imeru, Amen hose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom. Hallelujah, kol Israel ve'imeru, Amen. Shabbat shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom. I think most children learn very quickly that not every rule is created equal. What I mean by that is that my own children know very well which Guzik Sherman rules are bendable and which rules, if broken, results in no dessert for the rest of the week. And I think it's pretty understandable writing on the walls with marker versus sneaking out of bed after bedtime. You could probably guess which one causes me to lose my temper. And you would think that the hierarchy of the Torah rules would follow the same logic, that God would show a great fury for the big commandments broken. Do not steal and do not murder, do not lie. You would expect God to throw a fit over Bnei Israel, breaking the constructs, keep us grounded as a civil society, and yet that isn't precisely what we see in Mishpatim. You see in Mishpatim in our Torah reading this morning, as Andrew mentioned so eloquently, it outlines commandment after commandment. What happens after a person schemes against another? Exactly what Andrew spoke about. What happens when someone gossips? What punishment ensues when someone kidnaps another person? And yet, with all of those commandments, God's emotions are seemingly absent until we get to the following verses in Mishpatim. You shall not mistreat a stranger, a widow, or an orphan. And if you mistreat them, I will turn towards their voices as soon as I hear them cry. And even more, if you treat them poorly, I will get so angry that your own lives will be turned upside down. You have to ask yourself the question, what or whom do these people represent? The stranger, the widow, the orphan. Why out of all of these commandments does God feel so impassioned about the way we treat these people? Andrew, here's Chris Cooney. Chris Cooney, the French commentator, says to us that God chooses to speak here because often these are the people that can't speak at all. Their tears and vulnerabilities, and sometimes embarrassment or shame in asking for help. These are the reasons why God listens for the voices that get lost in the shuffle. God's asking us not just to protect the stranger and the orphan and the widow. I think God is asking us to give voice to the voiceless. And yet I still have to wonder if it's more than that. Not using our voice to decide what the most vulnerable people in our community need, but rather, and here's the harder part, engaging, conversing, joining underserved populations, and realizing how much we have to learn from each other. I don't think it's coincidental that we read these exact verses of Mishpatim during what is called Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. I can't believe that for the past 13 years, February is devoted to raising the voices of those with various disabilities. A reminder to all of us that using our voice isn't giving someone else our voice, but rather using our voice is understanding that we hold a powerful tool to help someone else find and use their own. This week, the Torah gives us a wake-up call that every time we think of our synagogue, our institutions, our programs, our schools, that when we build, we have to look around the table and ask ourselves the question, who's missing from this conversation? Whose voice does God hear, but we consciously or unconsciously choose to ignore? Rabbi Lisa Gelber, one of my friends and rabbi of Congregation Habonim in New York City, writes about her daughter living with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A disorder for some children causes more hyperactive and impulsive behaviors. And this is what Rabbi Gelber writes. She says, in a world that reflexively pushes her child to the side, I am reminded that I am part of a people that celebrates the one, the holy that lives within, the spark that bounces from place to place in holy inconvenience. This month, this week, she says, this moment, I celebrate the spark and diversity of humanity whose fire is just waiting to be ignited. Let us all have the courage to risk, walk, and celebrate those who take the road less traveled, because that will make the difference for all of us. What a beautiful, poignant lesson. That in propping up someone else's voice, we have the chance, we have the gift to see another spark of God just waiting to be ignited. I remember last year celebrating with one of our Sinai temple, Beit Bracha B'nai Mitzvah. For those of you that don't know, Beit Bracha is a program at Sinai Temple that mainstreams children with various learning disabilities and special needs within our incredible religious school. We are one community. And if you want to know more about my program, more about this program, please feel free to reach out to me after Shabbat, and I would love for you to learn more about it. I want to share with you that the bat mitzvah that morning said, Sinai Temple isn't her second home. Rather, Sinai Temple is her first home. And when I think about our student reciting those words, articulating that Sinai Temple is her first home, it's her voice that I hear when I think about building our Jewish community. If we choose to overlook her voice, if we choose to overlook and mute the voices of those unsure of their place, unsure of their validity, we actively choose then to leave out a piece of God in the conversation. I hear her voice. And I have to ask you, in your own family, in your own friendships, and the people that you consider part of your community, I want you to imagine one face or one voice of someone that you know that is often neglected, but so very much deserves a seat at the table, a seat at the conversation of what building Jewish community is, of what Jewish community should be. And that needs to be the voice that's mingled with yours. The word Shema does not only mean to hear, but rather it also means to pay attention. Right from within the words and pages of our Torah, God is urging us this morning, urging us every morning to pay attention. God hears the cries of those that are left on the fringes, but the action is ours. Let's pull them in, building a holy Jewish community filled with diverse abilities, diverse needs, a plethora of voices that speak one to another. Holy sparks, ignited souls, letting God know that we are listening to. Shabbat Shalom.